A story of 7 brothers. This story takes place in Mazandaran, north of Persia, a land of incomparable beauty, of high mountains and lofty shores. Mir Muhammad Ali was born in a small village called Imamzadi Kazim, just north of Sangassar. His family was entrusted with the guardianship of the tomb of Qasim, the son of an imam. He was a Sayyid, meaning a descendant of Muhammad, and was highly respected in the region. Out of his love for him, Prince Hassan Ali Mirza, the son of Fath Ali Shah, gave him a large garden in Shah Mirzad, 6 kilometers from Sangassar. In the middle of the 19th century, one of the most turbulent periods in the world's history, Persia was a land festering in bigotry, superstition, and corruption. But at the same time, like in many countries around the world, there was a rising anticipation of the coming of the Messiah, or the Qaim, meaning the Promised One. In the 1790s in Persia, Sheikh Ahmadi Asai, a prominent Shia Muslim theologian and jurist, founded the influential Shaikhi religious movement. The main purpose of the movement was to uncover the hidden truth in the holy writings regarding the imminent appearance of the Promised One. In his youth, Mir Muhammad Ali had become a devoted admirer of the teachings of Sheikh Ahmadi Asai and had taken a journey to Iraq, where he became his student. On his return, he got married and moved to Shah Mirzad, the native village of his wife, Sakineh. From this marriage were born 7 children, 4 sons and 3 daughters. From the time of his arrival in Shah Mirzad, Mir Muhammad Ali shared the teachings of the imminent coming of the Qaim with the local population, and this attracted much opposition from the local ulamas, the Muslim religious clergy. In 1844, a young merchant announced that he was the bearer of a message destined to transform the life of humanity. At a time when his country, Iran, was undergoing widespread moral breakdown, his message aroused excitement and hope among all classes, rapidly attracting thousands of followers. He took the name the Bab, meaning the gate in Arabic. The Bab announced that humanity stood at the threshold of a new era. His mission, which was to last only 6 years, was to prepare the way for the coming of a manifestation of God who would usher in the age of peace and justice promised in all the world's religions, Baha'u'llah. The Bab's prescription for spiritual renewal was revolutionary and was not received well by the religious authorities of Persia, who stirred up the population against the Babis. The Bab named the first 18 believers in his mission as letters of the living. Mullah Alayhi Bastami, who was given the title the second who believed, was asked by the Bab to go to Najaf and Karbala and was told,
"You are the first to leave the house of God and to suffer for his sake."
Mir Muhammad Ali had set out with 2 of his sons, Syed Ahmad and Mir Abul Taleb, to visit Karbala with the intention of introducing them to Syed Kazim, the successor of Sheikh Ahmadi Asai. Before their arrival, he learned that Syed Kazim had departed this life. They decided to travel to Najaf, where after reading a tablet of the Bab, Mir Muhammad Ali immediately accepted the new faith. One night, Muhammad, the messenger of God, appeared to him in a dream, asking the Prophet Ali to announce to him that after his death, his two eldest sons would suffer martyrdom in the path of the Qayyim. In the dream, he also understood that he would die in a few days. He called for his son, Sayyid Ahmad, weeping in sorrow because he knew that he would not be able to help the new faith, and acquainted him with his will and last wishes.
Dear son, I will not be able to return home with you as I will pass away soon. Please bury me and then go back with your brother to assist the cause of the Qayyim.
7 days later, he did indeed pass away. His sons returned to their native land, where the eldest son, Sayyid Ahmad, took over the custodianship of the tomb of Qasim and became a man of influence in the region, greatly esteemed for his eloquence and piety, and trusted by officials and religious leaders alike.
Una delle storie che è stata tramandata su Sayyid Ahmad racconta che un giorno lui si trovava nei pressi della città di Sari. Il Mujtahid Haji Mirza Muhammad Taghi lo invitò a pranzo insieme ad altri ospiti. Appena entrato in casa, si appartò con lui e volle condurlo nel salone, che si trovava al piano superiore. Sayyid Ahmad notò che le stoviglie e le posate erano molto preziose, con narghilè adornato di perle e tappeti di seta. Senza esitazione gli chiese se fosse possibile vivere in uno sfarzo del genere, quando tutto intorno c'erano persone in miseria, affamati, che non avevano neanche le scarpe. Dopo queste osservazioni si rimise le scarpe e indignato fece per andarsene. Il Mujtahid provò a trattenerlo e gli chiese se poteva comunque rimanere e presenziare alla riunione con gli altri invitati. Ma Sayyid Ahmad spiegò che nel suo stato d'animo gli avrebbe nuociuto ancor di più se fosse rimasto, e detto questo lasciò comunque la casa. Gli altri invitati, che erano in attesa di incontrare e ascoltare le parole di Sayyid Ahmad, chiesero ovviamente cosa fosse successo, e Haji Mirza Muhammad Taghi rispose loro che purtroppo, a causa di un forte mal di testa, l'ospite da loro atteso non avrebbe potuto presenziare. Haji Mirza Muhammad Taghi da quel giorno serbò grande rancore nei confronti di Sayyid Ahmad per quanto accaduto.
In the summer of 1848, Qudus, who was the 18th letter of the living, was arrested and taken to the city of Sari, where he was placed under house arrest in the home of Mirza Muhammad Taghi. The Bab, who at the same time was also a prisoner in the fortress of Chehri, sent a message to Mullah Hussein, the first letter of the living.
Adorn your head with my green turban, the emblem of my lineage, and with the black standard unfurled before you, lend your assistance to Qudus.
As soon as the message reached Mullah Hussein, he arose to execute the wishes of the Bab. Leaving Mashhad, he hoisted the black standard, placed the turban of the Bab upon his head, assembled his companions, mounted his horse, and set forth to rescue Qudus. At every village through which they passed, Mullah Hussein and his fellow disciples would fearlessly proclaim the message of the new day, would invite the people to embrace its truth, and few would join them on their journey. As they neared the village of Sari, they were forced to take shelter in a shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi because of the frequent attacks from the mobs. The Tabarsi shrine, situated in the heart of a forest, consisted of a relatively large block of land fenced off by a low wall on all sides. At the center of the block lay the tombstone of Sheikh Ahmad Tabarsi Mazandarani, who was one of the better known authors and philosophers of the Imamiyya sect of Islam. This place was without a caretaker and was a run-down building until the arrival of the Babis. The Babis were not soldiers. They were religious students, farmers, nobles, cooks, merchants, shopkeepers, builders, teachers, blacksmiths, tailors, and tradesmen. The Babis soon set to work, each using their own skills. As a first task, they built some defensive structures around the shrine to protect themselves. In the meantime, Mir Abu Talib, the third son of Mir Muhammad Ali, was visiting a village near the shrine when he heard that two Iraqi Babis had arrived at the village and were eager to reach the shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi.
I recalled the counsel of my father, who exhorted me to arise and help in the promotion of the cause of the Bab. I immediately decided to seize the opportunity that had presented itself to me, and together with them I reached the fort, met Mullah Hussein, and determined to consecrate the remaining days of my life to the service of the Babi cause. I decided then to return to Shamirzad, with the mission to bring more people to join the Babis in Sheikh Tabarsi. Some 33 men set off to join the Babis, led by my eldest brother Sayyid Ahmad. Amongst them were other members of my family. My second eldest brother, Mirza Abul Khazem, my brother-in-law, Mir Ibrahim, and my uncle, Mir Mihdi. Our mother made the arrangements for the three of us to travel to the fort. She asked us to make her proud and to be steadfast in assisting the cause of the Bab.
After a few weeks, the fourth and youngest brother, Sayyid Muhammad Riza, was also preparing to join the Babis at the fortified shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi. His mother advised him to delay his trip until she received a reply to the letter she had sent to Qudus. When her son asked her about the letter, she read out the contents.
This old lady understands that you, Qudus, regard all believers in complete equality. I had 4 sons, and have sent 3, and this is more than my fair share. I will indeed send my 4th son, if it is considered mandatory. However, I am old, and require this son to look after me from now on. However, if you see fit, I shall send him as well.
Qudus replied,
I advise you to keep your 4th son for your own service. Be assured that even if he is not here with us, he is truly considered one of us in spirit.
In September, while the Babis were barricaded in Fort Tabarsi, the king, Muhammad Shah Qajar, died. His eldest son, Nasir-ad-Din Shah, was crowned as the new king of Persia. Nasir-ad-Din Shah, under the spells of his prime minister, Amir Kabir, sent an army of 12,000 men and gave emphatic orders to his uncle, the newly appointed governor of Mazandaran, to eradicate the Babis. In his edict, he wrote,
You must exert yourself to the utmost in this affair. This is not a trifling amusement. The fate of our religion and of Shia doctrine hangs in the balance. You must cleanse the realm of this filthy and reprobate sect, so that not a trace of them remains.
The structures were just finished when Mullah Hussein received word that Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri would visit them. Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri had taken the title of Baha'u'llah a few months earlier in the conference of Badasht. As soon as Baha'u'llah arrived, Mullah Hussein introduced him with reverence and love to the rest of the Babis. Baha'u'llah said to him,
The only thing this fort and company require is the presence of Qudus.
He told Mullah Hussein to send 7 men to free Qudus. Then he himself went back to Tehran to buy food and other things the believers needed. But Baha'u'llah will not be able to fulfill his wishes, as on his way back to Tabarsi, he was arrested and taken to the town of Al-Mul, where he was held prisoner and was bastinadoed. Mirza Muhammad Taghi, out of fear, gave the order to release Qudus. As he drew near his destination, he sent forward a messenger to announce his approach. Roused to a burst of enthusiasm which he could not repress, Mullah Hussein started to his feet and, escorted by about 100 of his companions, hastened to meet the expected visitor. He placed 2 candles in the hands of each, lighted them himself, and bade them proceed to meet Qudus. The darkness of the night was dispelled by the radiance which those joyous hearts shed as they marched forth to meet their beloved. The forest of Mazandaran re-echoed to the sound of their acclamations. The number of Babis inside the fort had reached 313 men. Among them were 14 Afghans, 2 Iraqis, and 4 Indians. The Babis were not there to fight. They were loyal to the king, and their only purpose was to share with the religious leaders and their countrymen news of the coming of the Promised One. They were totally and utterly inexperienced and unfamiliar with military operations. To defend themselves, the only strength they had was their belief in the power of the Word of God. The Tabarsi shrine was under siege, and nobody was allowed to leave. The large army outside was getting ready to attack them. Qudus decided to rush out suddenly and try to scatter them. 2 hours after sunrise, he and 2 others mounted their horses and rode out of the fort. The rest followed on foot. As soon as they were out, they all shouted as loudly as they could, Ya Sahibul Zaman, meaning O Lord of the Age, which was one of the titles of the Bab. The great roar of their shouts and the glitter of the sun on their weapons frightened the enemy, who withdrew. A second army was mustered, but also this army was defeated. The Shah was surprised by the news that the prince had lost the fight, and so he sent another army to help him. This army built 7 walls around the fort of Sheikh Tabarsi. As the Babis were running out of water, Mullah Hussein gave the order to dig a well. On the day they finished the well, Mullah Hussein said,
Today we shall all have enough water for a bath. We must make ourselves clean, because soon we shall taste the cup of martyrdom. This night, before the hour of dawn, all those who wish may join me and rush forward to meet the enemy and to return forever to our beloved.
That afternoon, Mullah Hussein washed himself, put on new clothes, wrapped the Bab's green turban around his head, and waited for the final hour. He rode out at the head of his companions, shouting aloud, Ya Sahibul Zaman. During the battle, he was struck in the breast by a bullet shot by a soldier hiding in a tree. 2 of the friends carried him back to the fort. 36 other believers were also killed in the battle that night, and they were buried in a large grave next to the fort. One of them was Abul Qasim, the second of the 4 brothers. Mir Abu Talib, the 3rd brother, states that he himself miraculously survived that day, but suffered a wound which permanently paralyzed his left hand. A few days later, Qudus summoned him and gave him a letter for his mother. Their persistence in defensive action, coupled with a decrease in their food supplies, forced the Babis to take some desperate measures. When food supplies became scarce, Qudus instructed that the sicker and weaker horses be slaughtered for human consumption. After all the horses were consumed, the Babis turned to grass. They cleared the inside of the compound of all vegetation, including weeds and leaves. The prince eventually resorted to a plan to bring the Babis out of the fort. He swore on the Quran to set free all the defenders of the fort, but after the 230 Babis surrendered, he broke his promise. Some were captured and sold as slaves. A few escaped, others were killed. Qudus was captured and taken to Babul, where he was put to death. Nabil Zarandi, the Baha'i historian, narrated in his book, The Dawnbreakers, the details of the fate of the other two brothers. Sayyid Ahmad, the first son, was ushered into the presence of the Persian prince, who asked him why he had chosen to join the Babis.
My faith in this cause is born not of idle imitation. We believe Mullah Hussein to have been the bearer of the standard of which Muhammad has spoken, "Should your eyes behold the black standards proceeding from Khorasan, hasten ye towards them, even though ye should have to crawl over the snow." For this reason we have renounced the world and have flocked to his standard, a standard which is but a symbol of our faith. If you wish to bestow upon me a favor, bid your executioner put an end to me and enable me to be gathered to the company of my immortal companions. For the world and all its charms have ceased to allure me. I long to depart this life and return to my God.
Agha Muhammad was a man from Sangisar and had been a close friend of Sayyid Ahmad's father. He was well known and loved at court. Indeed, the Shah was so fond of him that he called him Dai, uncle. Agha Muhammad wrote to the prince and vouched for the two brothers, asking the prince to spare their lives. As a result, the prince ordered that they should be accompanied back to their homes by one of his trusted officers. The party had not yet left before Mirza Muhammad Taghi, the chief mujtahid of Sari, and 7 ulamas arrived at the camp with the intention of taking part in the punishment of the Babis. To his disappointment, the Babis had already been put to death, and Sayyid Ahmad had been set free. He urged the prince to reconsider his decision and to order Sayyid Ahmad's immediate execution. The prince eventually yielded and handed him over to Mirza Muhammad Taghi on the express condition that he would regard him as his guest until their arrival at Sari. No sooner had Mirza Muhammad Taghi set out in the direction of Sari than he proceeded to vilify Sayyid Ahmad and his father. Sayyid Ahmad pleaded,
"Why ill-treat a guest whom the prince has committed to your charge? Why ignore the Prophet's injunction, 'Honor thy guest, though he be an infidel'?"
In a burst of fury, Mirza Muhammad Taghi, together with his 7 companions, drew their swords and cut his body to pieces. With his last breath, Sayyid Ahmad was heard invoking the title of the Bab, Ya Sahibul Zaman.
Arise and rest assured that you will be with me. Tomorrow you shall witness what God has decreed. Rejoice and ease, the hour is approaching in this very city. Rest assured, this promise I give you will be fulfilled.
Sayyid Ahmad was buried in the city of Desvan. One of the ulama was the same mullah who years early had got angry with Sayyid Ahmad because he refused to enter his home. 9 letters of the living fell during the Fort Tabarsi episode. The events were reported in many dispatches from foreign diplomats in Persia, as well as in some newspapers in Europe. When the Bab heard about the deaths of Mullah Hussein and Qudus and about what had happened at the fort, tears rained from his eyes. For 9 days he would see none of his friends, and he was unable to write for 6 long months.
In his name,
Mir Abul Taleb was accompanied back to his village, where he delivered the letter from Qudus to his mother.
You have acted generously by giving up 3 of your sons in God's path. But God was just and had taken 2 and allowed you to keep 2.
The 4th brother, Sayyid Muhammad Reza, was named by Abdul Baha Remnants of the Sword, a title given to the survivors of the upheaval of Fort Tabarsi. When Abdul Baha was later asked by a certain Ghazanfar, a Baha'i living in Mazandaran, why this appellation had been given to Sayyid Muhammad Reza, he replied with a tablet that begins as follows:
O servant of the holy threshold, thy letter hath been received. Although Agha Sayyid Muhammad Reza, upon him be the glory of the All-Glorious, was not physically present at the fortress, yet he was there in spirit.
Baha'u'llah instructed several individuals, including Mir Abu Taleb, to write their recollections of what they had witnessed. Around 1880, Mir Abu Taleb started to write his account of the events at the shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi. Nabile Zarandi used his account as the basis for his section on the events at Fort Tabarsi in the Dawnbreakers. The Tabarsi uprising was not solely limited to the battles near the fortress. Families, fellow Babis all over the country played an active role in sustaining the resistance movement and keeping the memories alive. In addition to bearing the loss of their loved ones, these families had to endure years of verbal abuse, physical hatred, economic sanctions, and severe violation of their human rights. In the majority of cases, the ulama provoked the locals to impose an economic embargo on the families. In Sangasar and Shah Mirzad, the cruelty of the locals was particularly acute. When Mir Abu Taleb returned to Shah Mirzad, the inhabitants of the small village were celebrating the death of his family members and were congratulating and hugging one another in joy. He returned home and shared with the remnants of his family how his brothers and all the other Babis had suffered and given their lives for their faith. After the end of the Fort Tabarsi episode, severe persecution erupted in Shah Mirzad, and the family suffered greatly from the hate of their fellow citizens. The family was in constant threat, so eventually they were forced to move in with their sister, Masume, in Sangasar. Masume, who had also played a role in the siege at Fort Tabarsi by arranging for supplies and money to be sent to the Babis, was herself mourning the death of her husband and was faced with raising her 2 sons and 3 daughters in the midst of a great deal of persecution. Her home was looted several times. She continued, nevertheless, to play a leading part and rallied the Babis in the immediate aftermath of Fort Tabarsi. On one occasion, on the decree of a local cleric, she and her daughter were sentenced to be stoned to death. But once they were brought into the presence of the cleric, she spoke so eloquently and courageously that he ordered their release. In Sangasar, she welcomed her mother and her siblings' families, and the group lived together for the following years. As the locals refused to sell them any goods or services to be able to sustain their family, the 2 brothers became merchants, developing a route passing through the villages of Mazandaran, taking with them salt, fruit, and dried foods, and returning in the summer with rice. Over the years, they succeeded in spreading the faith in many villages in Mazandaran. A few years later, the 2 brothers married the 2 daughters of another survivor of the Tabarsi event, Mullah Amina, and they moved back to Shah Mirzad.
la madre Dolati e mia mamma. E la figlia di Ahsed Mohammad Reza, Shah Mirzadi, Bahá'u'lláh e Sheikh Tabarsi. Questo è mio nonno che è stato a Sheikh Tabarsi con il suo fratello, Omar Abu Taleb. Loro due sono sopravvissuti, erano 4 fratelli, 2 sono stati martirizzati, Ahsed Ahmad, Omar Abul-Qasim. Però Ahsed Mohammad Reza e Omar Abu Taleb sono sopravvissuti. La loro storia c'è nella storia di Nabil. Ardusi, che si chiamava Malak Nessa, era figlia di Mullah Amina, che anche lui era Bahá'u'lláh e Sheikh Tabarsi, Mullah Amina. Aveva 2 figli, ha fatto sposare a questi 2 fratelli Ahsed Mohammad Reza e Omar Abu Taleb, Malak Nessa e Kubra. Queste 2 sorelle erano le mogli di questi 2 fratelli. Mia nonna raccontava molte storie per me e ha vissuto 30 anni a casa nostra perché il marito era morto quando mia mamma aveva 4 anni e mio padre, Arajan, Ruhollah Montazi, ha preso Ardusi, ha portato a casa per 30 anni e stava con noi. Finché morì. Quando morì Ardusi a Sanghesar, molta gente venivano a prendere il riso che in genere si fa nel funerale perché diceva che è benedetta perché lei è la moglie di Ahsed Mohammad Reza. Era una donna molto devota e parlava molto bene di Ahsed Mohammad Reza e diceva che in continuazione faceva insegnamento. Quando aveva 19 anni l'hanno arrestato, dice a casa, che lui stava facendo la barba in casa, l'hanno arrestato. E questo raccontava che lui portava i frutti secchi perché Shah Mirza non davano da mangiare o cose vendere a Ahsed Mohammad Reza. Però lui aveva un giardino che toglieva dei frutti e portava nelle montagne a vendere, a prendere grano e portare a casa per far mangiare 18 persone che erano rimasti dal fratello, dai sorelle, che erano il padre che erano martirizzati, Ahsed Ahmad, Omar Abul-Qasim, Omar Abu Taleb. Tutti questi figli erano 18 persone che lui accudiva a queste persone. Lui è nato a Shah Mirzad, però aveva questo desiderio di insegnare che andavano questi 2 fratelli, Omar Abu Taleb e Ahsed Mohammad Reza, viaggiavano sempre, Shah Mirzad, Sanghesar, Mazandaran, Semnan, Roshanku, Eval, tutti questi paesi portavano la roba per vendere e insegnavano la fede.
In 1861, the 2 brothers were arrested with 2 other Baha'is. The 4 were taken on foot in heavy chains to Tehran. The intention was to execute them, but the government ordered instead that they be imprisoned in the Siachal, the same Siachal which 9 years earlier was blessed by the presence of Baha'u'llah. In the dungeon, they were imprisoned along with Mullah Sadiq Muqaddas and his son of 10, Ibn Azdak, who would later be both appointed hands of the cause of God. At the Shah's court, Aga Muhammad Isange Sari, the same man who during the Fort Tabarsi episode had asked the prince to ensure the safety of the sons of Mir Muhammad Ali, despite great difficulties, finally managed to obtain orders for their release. But the two brothers would not leave the prison until all their fellow prisoners were also released. Miraculously, Aga Muhammad Isange Sari arranged this as well. He took the two brothers to his home in Tehran as guests, and he accepted the faith.
Quando è stato arrestato a Teheran, 2 anni e mezzo, insegnava la fede anche ai prigionieri, che lì sono diventati, diceva sì, 7 persone, però non sapeva il nome e chi erano. Uno di questo prigioniero veniva insegnato da Osman Reza, dice che io ho ucciso mio zio, i figli di mio zio, i miei cugini sono andati a Karbala, tornano e vogliono uccidermi. Osman Reza lo diceva: no, stai calma, tu devi affidare a Dio, il cuore puro, devi dire che non farai mai più delle cose bene. Dice sì, tutto quello che dici, però quelle tornano e mi uccidono. E lui dice no, abbi fiducia. Poi sono venuti il Farrosh a chiamare lui, dice: visto, sono venuti i miei cugini a uccidermi. Dice: vai tranquillo, non ti preoccupare, tu abbi fede. Dopo mezz'ora torna e butta sul ginocchio di Osman Reza, dice: tu chi sei? Non mi hanno ucciso perché hanno detto che se uccidiamo lui, nostro padre non vivrà. E allora lo perdoniamo, è finito, e lui diventa Baha'i.
After this, they undertook a trip to Isfahan, Yazd, and Khorasan in the company of Mullah Sadiqi Moghaddas and his son Ibn Azdak, visiting Babi communities. Several accounts comment on the joyful and radiant faces of these two brothers and mention that the Babis in each place look forward to their visits. After the declaration of Baha'u'llah, Mir Abu Talib and Sayyid Muhammad Riza accepted the Baha'i faith and wholeheartedly followed Baha'u'llah in the quest of transforming mankind. Through the years, this remarkable family was the recipient of over 40 tablets from Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. One famous tablet addressed to Sayyid Muhammad Riza by Baha'u'llah is called Rizvanul Adl, the Garden of Justice. The research department at the World Center writes that while the whole tablet has not yet been officially translated into English, some extracts of the tablet were translated by Shoghi Effendi and are published in Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah, in The Advent of Divine Justice, and in The Promised Day Is Come. In the Rizvanul Adl, Baha'u'llah wrote Sayyid Muhammad Riza,
O Supreme Pen, raise up the servant who was named Reza after Nabil, and cause him to be one of the embodiments of justice in this contingent realm. Verily his justice is his faith in God, and it is a justice unmatched by any other. O servant, hearken unto the shrill voice of the pen of the Most High, and gather all men upon the shore of the most mighty ocean, which hath emerged through this most ancient and everlasting name. Protect thou the servants of the All-Merciful, lest the blows dealt by the evil suggestions of the manifestations of Satan transform the faces of them that have recognized their Lord. Such is the commandment of thy Lord, the Almighty, the Beneficent, unto thee. Act thou in accordance with what the All-Powerful, the Beauteous, hath bidden thee. Be thou a barrier between the forces of unbelief and the hosts of the All-Merciful, lest that blasphemous horde transgress their bounds. Thus hath a decree been sent down from the kingdom of the judgment of thy Lord, the All-Knowing, the All-Wise. we verily have made thee a means of our remembrance amidst our servants, and a fortress for our creation in this world, that thou mayest shelter them from the darts of doubt, and draw their attention to this announcement, through which the temples of names have trembled, the faces of men have been changed, the earth of vainglory hath been cleft, and the fruit hath fallen from every lofty and wondrous tree. Blessed art thou for having utterly abolished the idol of vain imagining through the power of thy Lord, for having cast off from thy body the robe of blind imitation, and for having adorned it instead with the raiment of divine unity, through this name, the most holy, the blessed, the most exalted, the all-encompassing.
L'odio contro i Babi era enorme. Uno dei doti di Sanghesar aveva perfino vietato alle persone del luogo di consumare il riso, che proveniva dalla regione di Mazandaran, in quanto in quel luogo era stato versato il sangue degli infedeli che avevano reso impuro le risaie. Un'altra storia riguarda il più giovane dei fratelli. In questa storia in particolare si può constatare come nulla riuscì a mettere in ginocchio questi fratelli. Anzi, essi sfruttarono ogni occasione possibile per insegnare la causa e portare la lieta novella alle persone. La storia parte dal Mujtahid di Sanghesar, che un giorno dal pulpito si mise a dichiarare che sia Agha Sayyid Mohammad Reza che suo fratello Agha Mir Abu Taleb erano due miscredenti eretici che danneggiavano la fede dell'Islam, al punto da richiedere che ogni casa in cui essi avrebbero messo piede venisse abbattuta e rasa al suolo. Il Mujtahid reiterò questa dichiarazione per diversi giorni, sempre dal suo pulpito, finché arrivò alle orecchie di Agha Sayyid Mohammad Reza, che si trovava a 6 chilometri di distanza da Sanghesar, a Shah Mirza. Si mise subito in cammino verso la città di Sanghesar per recarsi proprio a casa del Mujtahid. Trovò che vi erano altre persone presenti nella stanza. Il Mujtahid, nel vederlo, a dispetto di quanto aveva predicato, si alzò e andò a salutarlo, abbracciandolo e baciandolo. Lo fece accomodare al posto d'onore nella stanza e lo trattò con rispetto e cortesia. Lo invitò perfino a fermarsi a pranzo, sostenendo che sarebbe stato un onore per lui averlo come ospite. Agha Sayyid Mohammad Reza si scusò affermando che doveva recarsi da sua sorella, ma visto che avrebbe dovuto trattenersi per qualche giorno in città, avrebbe avuto modo di rendergli un'altra visita. Quindi si alzò e salutò il Mujtahid recandosi a casa di sua sorella. Appena uscito, i presenti si rivolsero al Mujtahid, osservando che in base ai suoi stessi ordini la sua casa ora avrebbe dovuto essere abbattuta. A quel punto i presenti iniziarono a rendersi conto che quello che il loro ospite aveva affermato dal pulpito non era altro che il frutto di vane fantasie imbastite soltanto al fine egoistico di conservare la propria posizione di preeminenza nella loro comunità.
Sayyid Muhammad Riza and his brother established the following pattern for studying the writings with their fellow Baha'is. Each time a new tablet arrived to a Baha'i in the area, Mir Abu Taleb and Sayyid Muhammad Riza would travel to Sanghesar to gather at night in the house of other learned Baha'is and study the tablet. Then the two brothers would return to Shah Mirzad and invite the local Baha'is to the garden, which was given to their father a long time ago by the prince, and by candlelight share the tablet with other Baha'is. On 2 occasions, Sayyid Muhammad Riza had the bounty of traveling to the Holy Land to be in the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. In 1893, following the death of Baha'u'llah, Sayyid Muhammad Riza visited Abdu'l-Baha in Akka for the first time. When he reached the gate of Akka, news about his arrival reached Abdu'l-Baha, who went to greet him at the gate, and together they went to visit the shrine of Baha'u'llah. During this trip, he became aware of the scheming of the covenant breakers, and upon his return, he warned the Baha'is of the area so effectively that the covenant breakers could not influence any local believer. Sayyid Muhammad Riza's second pilgrimage happened in 1897, after the passing of his brother Mir Abu Talib. He traveled there with a group of people that included the son of his eldest brother, Sayyid Ahmad, Aka Sayyid Muhammad Baqi. By that time he was very frail, and only the love for the Master gave him the strength to reach the Holy Land.
Avevamo un centro Baha'i a Sanghisar c'erano molti Baha'i, moltissimi Baha'i. Avevamo tutti I giorni Mashruq al-Askar, andavamo a pregare. Mio padre, Ruhollah Mumtazi, era molto devoto e voleva che tutti I giorni andavamo a Mashruq al-Askar a fare preghiera e imparare a memoria delle preghiere.
Sayyid Muhammad Riza, who also wrote his memoirs for the family, passed away in Babul in 1899. Abdu'l-Baha wrote for him a tablet of visitation. The people of the town forbade his burial, so it was the Luri Baha'is who enabled him to be buried in their quarter. In 1930, his children heard the plans of the government to use the area where he was interred for a project. One evening, his son and his daughter moved the body to Fort Tabarsi. At last he was with the heroes that he so deeply wanted to join many years before. In his will and testament, Sayyid Muhammad Riza wrote,
"Please continue to use the garden for the Baha'i friends. Hold there regular meetings where the friends can be rejoiced by the glad tidings, and use the fruits of the land to provide solace to them."
And that is what exactly happened. Year after year, meetings, including summer schools, were held in the gardens, and generations of Baha'is could enjoy them.
قسمت پایین مال همون باغ محمد رضا بود و میر ابو طالب که اونجا رو به خصوص مدرسه های تابستانه درش تشکیل میدادن و کلاس های مختلف درش تشکیل میدادن. من یادم است یکی از این کلاس ها رو آقای آوارگان اونجا درس میداد. در اونجا مدرسه تابستانه تشکیل شد. من یادم هست عموی من، عمو عباس، با خانم دومش اینا شرکت کرده بودن. در اون مدرسه هم غذا و اینا رو همونجا توی مدرسه میخوردن و درست میکردن و میخوردن. قسمت بالای این باغ محمد رضا اینا که البته بینشون دیوار بود، این مربوط به مادر بزرگ من که از پدرش بهش ارث رسیده بود. پدرش برادر بزرگتر همین محمد رضا و دیگران بود که در قلعه شیخ تبرسی هم شرکت کرده بود.
این دقیقاً خود مکان متبرک است و اون پنجره های قدیمی و اون دری که بعد از کنتور برق دیده میشه، این همون اتاقی که بود میگفتن اتاق دعا و آقا سید محمد رضا در اونجا کلاس درس داشته. این عکس هم یه قسمت دیگر از اون خونه آقا سید محمد رضاه. پشت این افرادی که وایستادن یه قسمتش باغه و این ساختمون قدیمی جایی بود که مثلا آشپزخونه بود و یه گوشش هم تنور زمینی بود که با هیزم این تنور رو روشن میکردن برای پختن نون. و من دقیقاً در خاطرم هست که ما موقع که بچه یا نوجوان بودیم میرفتیم شهرمیرزاد، میامدیم اینجا، مادرم خمیر درست میکرد، میآوردیم اینجا، 2 نفر بودن که این برامون نون میپختن. نونوایی به اون صورت توی شهرمیرزاد نبود تا چندین سال بعد که یک نونوایی ایجاد شد. اینها دارن غذا آماده میکنن، گویا سیب زمینی یا پیاز دارن پوست میکنن برای مدرسه تابستانه.
After 8 generations, Aka Mir Muhammad Ali and Sakine's progeny are scattered around the world. In a tablet to the daughters of Sayyid Ahmad, Abdul Baha wrote,
He is the All-Glorious. O ye, the offspring of him who died as a martyr on the pathway of the beauty of Abha. Your noble father, even as the bright moon is casting down his rays from the horizon of the kingdom. O ye, his progeny, his posterity, and the people of his house, be ye rejoiced for having issued from that bower of roses, and been quarried from that precious mine. For he did offer up his soul to his soul's beloved one, and did lavishly pour out his holy blood on the path of that sun that lighteth up the world. And the effects of his sacrifice will be revealed in the life of his offspring forever and ever.